Old friends, but new tensions. US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping talk Taiwan at a virtual summit. It's official. US President signs a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law. What's China got to do with it? Remembering Mr. Democracy. A memorial concert is held for President Lee Teng-hui. And it's a frog's life, the mission to save one of Taiwan's most beloved amphibians. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping are wrapping up a virtual meeting, their first since Biden took office in January. Taiwan featured heavily in the talks, which ran overtime into 3.5 hours. Biden told Xi he strongly opposed any unilateral effort to change the status quo. But Xi warned the US encouraging Taiwan's independence would be what it called playing with fire. Biden said it was the two leaders' responsibility to ensure that competition between the two superpowers does not veer into conflict. He said that Beijing and Washington should be clear where they disagree and work together on shared challenges, such as climate change. Xi called Biden his old friend and said he hopes the talks will help move relations forward in a positive direction.
As I've said before, it seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition. It's why we believe, and you and I have talked about this, all countries have to play by the same rules of the road, why the United States is always going to stand up for our interests and values, and those of our allies and partners.
As the meeting got underway, our reporter Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick asked Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Dexter Roberts what his expectations for the summit were.
The U.S. side has, as you pointed out, they've made a point of trying to temper expectations. I think in Beijing, there's probably a similar attitude. There certainly are plenty of issues that will be discussed, from trade to Taiwan. But again, I'm not expecting much more than just ideally a lowering of the tensions between the two sides, but not any real breakthrough agreement, certainly.
Tensions over Taiwan are expected to be one of the keystone issues at this summit. But with both sides increasingly at loggerheads, how do you think they can actually cool these tensions to prevent, as Biden said, competition from spilling over into conflict?
You know, the most we can hope for is guardrails that limit the potential for any real conflict happening in the near future. I do think, unfortunately, that the two sides find it very difficult to come to sort of any agreement on Taiwan. And I think that most likely we're going to continue to see tensions rise. As you know, General Secretary Xi Jinping has made it very clear that he would like to see Taiwan somehow come more under the thumb of the mainland during his time in power. Well, the good news is we know now he's going to be in power for probably a very long time. So there's not an immediate imperative for this to happen. But again, I don't think those tensions will go away, given what we're hearing from Beijing. Summits like this do reduce tensions, sort of restoring this apparently relatively close relationship that Biden and Xi have going back more than a decade. More meetings like this to try to lower tensions, but very unlikely that the two sides would actually agree on a path forward over Taiwan.
Joe Biden's virtual meeting with Xi came just a few hours after he signed a landmark $1.2 trillion infrastructure investment plan into law. The law took months to negotiate and means new investment in roads, bridges, mass transit, electric vehicles and internet access for millions of Americans. It also stands to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. The bill's passage is a much-needed victory for the US president, whose popularity has slumped amid rising inflation and challenges surrounding the COVID pandemic. Now, for Joe Biden, the record infrastructure bill is a way to put the US on a path to, quote, win the economic competition of the 21st century with China and other large countries. To find out the implications of this statement, I spoke to Peter Lewis, a financial analyst and presenter of Money Talk on RTHK Radio 3.
What we have to bear in mind is that China is a developing nation, so it needed to build that infrastructure in order to help its economy develop. Now, of course, America is a developed country. It still needs ongoing investment in its infrastructure. And of course, it can look at what China has done and be impressed with the vast network of transportation that it's built, broadband, and say, yes, that we need to do more there ourselves. Maybe look at what other countries have done as well and how they've chosen to invest in their infrastructure. But it shouldn't be seen as a competition or a race. It should be done for each country what is best for them economically. And there's no question that America needs to invest in its infrastructure, and that will help over the long term its economic growth.
Can America afford this huge infrastructure bill?
But what we've got to bear in mind is that coming on top of this is another spending bill that's going to invest in social welfare, education, climate change measures. But these two bills combined do add a lot to the total debt, but also they're inflationary. And we have to remember that inflation is taking off in the US. Consumer price inflation is now at a 31-year high, the highest level since 1990, over 6%. So the worry is that all of this extra spending could be very inflationary and drive inflation even higher, and then force the Fed to have to slam on the economic brakes, raise interest rates, which could tip the US into recession. The difference with China is that it's got a big current account surplus. It's got a lot of savings that it can tap into. For the last decade, it's been a huge exporter, which has generated a lot of foreign exchange reserves. But even China has to be careful. China's debt position has increased massively over the past few years as a percentage of GDP. And people are saying they're getting to the limit as well of what they can go and borrow to fund further expansion. So both countries are in that sense in the same position.
The Ministry of Labour has announced that a first group of Indonesian migrant workers will be allowed to enter Taiwan. This comes after almost a year of restrictions due to the pandemic. The Labour Ministry recently announced a new points system to allow workers back in the country if they meet the ministry's criteria. 96 workers have already qualified for quarantine accommodation. Of those 96, 7 unvaccinated workers will be able to get their shots after they enter Taiwan. A visit by US senators to Taiwan last week was part of efforts to learn how the US can best support the country's defense. Members of the delegation have said. The visit, which included Republican senators John Cornyn and Mike Crapo, was shrouded in secrecy. But a news release from the senators on Monday confirmed the delegation met with defense and foreign affairs officials in Taiwan, as well as President Tsai Ing-wen. They also visited the world's largest semiconductor foundry in Hsinchu to receive a briefing about Chinese threats to Taiwanese chip making. A US journalist who spent nearly 6 months imprisoned by Myanmar's military junta is on his way home. More than 100 journalists, media officials or publishers have been detained since the military ousted the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi in February. The managing editor of an online magazine in Myanmar, Danny Fenster, was sentenced to 11 years of hard labour last week for spreading false or inflammatory information and contacting illegal organisations. But he was handed over to Bill Richardson on Monday after the former US diplomat negotiated his release. The pair spoke to reporters in Doha on their way back to the US.
Happy to be on my way home. I'm incredibly thankful for everything Bill's done, everything his foundation has done.
How did you feel when you heard the sentence Monday?
I was a little bit surprised. I knew it could have come that way, but I knew that there were still ways to get home from there. So I was just waiting to see what would happen.
Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has announced he will run in the country's Senate elections next May. Duterte is term limited and cannot run for president again, but he is allowed to run for other positions. Sources close to the president had indicated He was planning a bid for vice president, which would have seen him running against his own daughter, Sara Duterte Carpio. But speculation ended as Duterte filed last minute to run for a Senate seat. Duterte's 6-year term has been marked by controversy, with critics railing at what they consider to be the president's authoritarian tendencies. A musical evening attended by high-level dignitaries, including Taiwan's president, was held to honor the late President Lee Teng-hui. The memorial concert held in Taipei marked more than a year since the passing of the man credited with bringing democracy to Taiwan. James Chater has the details.
The favorite songs of late Taiwanese President Lee Teng-hui narrates the story of his life. 15 months after his death, a memorial concert and retrospective for the life of the former Taiwanese leader. The event on Monday took place at the National Concert Hall and was organized by the foundation set up in his name. Current President Tsai Ing-wen and politicians from both the ruling Democratic Progressive Party and opposition Kuomintang were in attendance. It was a moment to remember Lee's legacy and especially his contributions to Taiwan's democracy. Lee Teng-hui was Taiwan's first locally born president, as well as the first to be democratically elected to the position. That's led many in Taiwan to call him Mr. Democracy. When he died in July last year at the age of 97, people queued outside the memorial hall to pay their respects to the former leader.
我觉得他做的事情并不是用言语可以表达，甚至他做的事情是花了很长的时间，为我们民族做了贡献。
永远怀念他，我们有台湾这么自由民主，就是他的功劳。
The program on Monday included some of Lee's favorite songs in later life, A Thousand Winds and Moonlight Sorrow by Tang Yuxian. The Lee Teng-hui Foundation said they plan to hold more memorial concerts in the future, with any funds raised used to help strengthen democracy and freedom in Taiwan. Rick Yi and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, from lung complications to breathing issues, Delhi faces another lockdown, but not because of COVID-19. Details in a moment.
So, 你觉得山给了你什么？
没有办法用几句简短的话语来带过，但它造就现在的我。
山就是给了一个我们远离世俗的环境，你可以忘记很多事情。
不要怕去探索新的东西吧。
很深层的去认识一块土地，去认识一个很深邃的自然。
在山的面前，你只会一直感觉到自己的渺小。
每一次都有不同的考验哦。
妈妈表现怎么样？
很好，十分坚强。
山是有魔力的地方。
那如果今天不让你爬山，你觉得你会死？
生命肯定会延续下去，但我想心灵有一部分会枯萎掉吧。
湾最有人情味的地方。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A reminder of our top story. US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping met in a virtual meeting, their first since Biden took office in January. Russia has conducted an anti-satellite weapon test that destroyed one of the country's satellites and created a cloud of dangerous debris, endangering crew members on the International Space Station. The explosion forced the crew on board the ISS to quickly take shelter in one of the station's docked capsules to avoid floating debris. To date, only the US, China, India and Russia have conducted successful anti-satellite weapon tests. The United States condemned the test and accused Russia of weaponizing space.
The test has so far generated over 1,500 pieces of trackable orbital debris and hundreds of thousands of pieces of smaller orbital debris that now threaten the interests of all nations. In addition, this test will significantly increase the risk to astronauts and cosmonauts on the International Space Station, as well as to other human spaceflight activities.
The European Union has agreed to widen its sanctions on Belarus in response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis on the country's border with Poland. It is estimated that over 4,000 migrants, mostly from Iraq, Syria and Yemen, are trapped at the border, unable to enter Poland or retreat back into Belarus. They face freezing weather conditions without adequate shelter or access to food and medical assistance. Poland has reinforced its border with an extra 15,000 soldiers, guards and police. The EU accuses Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko of using the migrants as pawns in a form of hybrid warfare. The EU issued sanctions on Belarus in June over its crackdown on protests last year. Government agencies are warning that the pollution in and around India's capital could spike in the coming days with a change in weather. India's top court ordered New Delhi authorities to allow their staff to work from home, and schools have been shut. As Louise Watts reports, India was one of the countries that watered down a pledge to phase out coal at the Glasgow COP26 summit.
A school in India's capital closed. This time not because of the pandemic, but because of air pollution. New Delhi and its surrounding areas are obscured by haze. The pollution is classified as hazardous according to Tuesday's readings from air quality monitoring sites.
और उसको लेकर के जैसे अभी आज से दिल्ली के अंदर सभी स्कूल कॉलेज संस्थान बंद कर दिए गए हैं। दिल्ली के अंदर सभी कंस्ट्रक्शन कार्य जो हैं वो सारे बंद कर दिए गए। दिल्ली के अंदर सरकारी दफ्तर में जो कर्मचारी अधिकारी हैं वो वर्क फ्रॉम होम कर दिए गए।
On Monday, India opened its borders to fully vaccinated foreign tourists for the first time since March 2020, if anyone wants to visit. New Delhi has been battling a hazardous haze since early November. This week, the Supreme Court ordered authorities to shut offices in New Delhi and nearby cities, allowing millions to work from home. This followed the suspension of building work for 4 days and the closure of schools for a week. Some schools had only reopened 2 weeks earlier after 19 months of pandemic-related shutdowns.
अब आजकल तो हर एक को इतना ज़्यादा ब्रीदिंग प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है, आंखों में जलन होने लगती है, बाहर निकलते हैं तो ऐसा लगता है बाहर ना निकलें, लेकिन घर में बैठ के भी सफोकेशन होती है तो बाहर निकलना भी ज़रूरी है, थोड़ा फिजिकल होना ही चाहिए.
Major cities in India regularly rank among the most polluted in the world. The air in Delhi worsens every winter when farmers in neighbouring states burn crop waste and the smoke is trapped by the colder air. The pollution also comes from vehicle emissions and coal-fired power plants. India gets the bulk of its power from coal. The country has pledged to reduce coal use, but it also pushed back at last week's UN climate summit against phasing out coal altogether because of its growing energy needs. Environmentalists say the last-minute change to the Glasgow Agreement to phase down coal rather than phase it out not only weaken the deal, but also India's own fight against climate change and worsening air quality. Karma Xu and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Although Taiwan did not attend COP26 in an official capacity, Taiwan organised environment and climate change events on the sidelines in Glasgow. TaiwanPlus reporter Bing Wang spoke to Zhao Jiawei, Professor of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at National Taiwan University, to find out what Taiwan would take away from the summit.
I would like to suggest that the government should follow the Scottish model. Why I say Scottish model? Because Scotland is also not a formal member of party, but during the COP26, they made a very concrete contribute. Scotland government, they actually make a £1 million donation to that fund. It was the first regional country to do so. I think we have to move to make some concrete cooperation project with all our small islands, which are also our former ally.
So what do you think are the next concrete steps for Taiwan?
Phase out of coal and the fossil fuel subsidy. Those are two issues should be bring to the table in terms when we talk about net zero roadmap. For next 3 months, there's a determined moment for Taiwan. First, the government have to publish their net zero pathway no later than this year. So they only have 1 month left to make sure that the net zero pathway can reflect to those key elements that's discussed in the COP26. For the next February and the next March, in the Congress, we were working on the climate law reform. We call the Climate Change Action Act or the Climate Change Response Act. We have to dialogue, we have discussed those issues, and we have to make the net zero emission pledge become a legally binding pledge, and also have the concrete policy instrument like the carbon fee and the carbon levy mechanism.
The Taipei frog is one of Taiwan's rarest endemic species. With population numbers reaching new lows in northern Taiwan, New Taipei's local government has teamed up with researchers and conservationists to give these fascinating creatures a fresh chance at survival. TaiwanPlus reporter Alice Cheng has more.
有看到台北赤蛙在那边，它停在荷叶上面。
With its distinctive markings and emerald green color, the Taipei frog is one of Taiwan's most beloved amphibians. At only 2 to 4 centimeters long, they can be hard to spot. There was a time when they could be found almost everywhere in the country, but not anymore.
以过去这2年来看的话，那个评估出来的数量可能只有不到40只吧，可能就30几只吧。
Scientists say their population was devastated due to the use of pesticides and land development. To help save the species, New Taipei City Government and Taipei Zoo have released 200 of the frogs bred in captivity to the wild in both Shanzhi and Shimen.
比较担心是会不会有繁殖下一代啦，但如果能够繁殖下一代，其实都还算 OK。
However, experts say the key to the Taipei frog's long-term survival is to protect its habitat.
就物种保育来说，其实我们最怕的就是放出去，它好好的，可是当人们不再关注这个物种，然后栖地进入下一个开发状态的时候，可能这个物种又会瞬间消失。
Frogs are the most endangered group of animals on the planet, with 1/3 of their species already on the brink of extinction. Conservationists hope their efforts will help Taiwan's special emerald frogs beat the odds. Alice Chen for TaiwanPlus.
A Sumatran elephant calf has had her trunk partially amputated after being caught in a poacher's trap on the Indonesian island. Sumatran elephants are a critically endangered subspecies. The 1-year-old female calf is one of only around 700 Sumatran elephants in the wild. Conservationists say poaching has increased in Sumatra since last year as the coronavirus pandemic has hurt the livelihoods of the local population. 6 bear cubs that were injured and orphaned in the US are finally having their day in the sun. The cubs came to Ramona Wildlife Center in California in August and September. 5 of the bears were found without their mother, while another had suffered burned paws from a large wildfire. The cubs have all moved outdoors, a significant step in their rehabilitation towards being released back into the wild. Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We'll leave you with some footage of Dubai's biennial air show. Check out TaiwanPlus News on YouTube and our website for this show and more. Stay safe and see you next time.